just spent an entire 13 minutes talking about hell and the doctrine of hell, the reality of hell, the eternality of hell, and we're not done.
Well, just hearing that, just hearing you say that, hell, I mean, you just don't, I mean, it makes me just take a deep, like, wait, hold on a minute, we did? Because you just don't hear people, you don't hear the word hell unless it's in, like, hardly ever, unless it's in a curse word or in a sense that's passive or joking, but just literally it being a real place and talking about it and what it looks like. So you need to go check that out at EngageMagazine.net.
Yeah, if you missed it. And by the way, if you're listening to us and you actually want to kind of see what goes on the radio program, you can always check us out on YouTube. You go to EngageMagazine.net. We'll have links to all of our videos and everything there. But before we leave the doctrine of hell, Kelley, there's a few things you wanted to mention.
Yes, okay. Really just because the doctrine of hell is a very overwhelming doctrine, and there's so much to look at and to study.
And we should say you've studied this, specifically this.
It's been an ongoing process.
Weeks. Yeah.
But I found some great resources from, like, Ligonier Ministries has a great article called 4 Truths About Hell. Desiring God has a great article. It was also a podcast called Is God Everywhere and Absent from Hell? And then there's also this book that I just got yesterday, so I just started reading it, but so far it has been great. And it's called 4 Views on Hell, and it's part of a Counterpoint series where they go through and they take different doctrines and they bring in different people supporting different views and let them lay out their arguments and contrast them. And it's really great, and it's a great approach to just look at, here are where people disagree on hell, and all these people in this book agree on the existence of hell, but they disagree on the nature of hell or its duration. So just good resources to look at if you want to look more into the topic.
And again, we'll put that link down in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put the link in the description. And if you just want to check it out, you can go to engagemagazine.net/podcast and get the information there. So, all right, I'm going to go back to my cartoon days. And you know what, guys? We should have done, after that segment, we should have fact-checked to see if Kelley was right about Tom being a cat. But
I feel like
I can't admit, I don't know if I can say she's right. But here's the thing. The cloud, the halo, the harp, the wings. First things right off the bat, I want to say this. We don't become angels. There seems to be a big misconception that I see, and it's from, like, movies and
What's
cartoons
the same
and comics.
common misconception that people have when they say that we're all children of God, too? We've talked about this before because we know that's not the case. It sounds good, and at first you're like, but the reality is we're all created in the image of God, but we're all not children of God. There's a distinction there. That's common, and even some of my best friends that are Christians common to make that mistake. I'm like, I pull myself, but I don't think you can find that there, buddy.
Yeah, that word you keep using, it does not mean what you think it means.
So anyways, it's the same idea. That people,
right, yeah. I mean, well, and the reason that people have that idea is simply because they don't think through the doctrinal issues.
Sure.
We never become angels, just like angels will not become human. We are different creations, and God created it that way, and that is a good thing. So Kelley, if that is a misconception of heaven, what is heaven like?
Well, I'll try not to just, list off a bunch of different Bible verses,
No,
but
okay.
based on a list of Bible verses I could give anyone who asks, we see that heaven is a place of treasures. Heaven is a place prepared for us. It's a place of joy and reward. It's a place of justice. It's a place of a single community. And most of all, it's a place of the presence of God.
Wait a minute,
pleasures
no marriage?
forevermore.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we are not getting into that discussion.
Ooh, interesting question.
So there is another a thing about that when we talk about heaven, and I realize now that we have done this. When we talk of heaven, we talk of some place that is far away that we don't have, that we will reach one day. And in a sense, that is proper and true. But in another sense, John says that he has written these things so that we may have everlasting life. And he writes it in the present tense.
Right.
So heaven is now. What does that mean?
I think it means that this life is not a waiting period to get to heaven. And that's not what it's about. I think it's important that we know what heaven is and that we, expectantly wait for that day where we get there. But Christianity and the Christian life isn't about going to heaven when we die. And it's really like, I remember as a kid being really young and sitting up in a tree with my friends and them talking about like, oh, I can't wait to get to that heaven, Remember, like our parents were telling us they were going to have golden streets and we're going to have like all this stuff going on and I'll probably have like my dog there or something. And I was just thinking like, is that why we're Christians? Like, is that what this is about? And it's so clear from the scripture that is not what it's about. And a good question actually that TJ asked me when we were talking this through is, I think a question we need to ask all of ourselves, and it's, what do you want to get out of heaven? Would you still want to go to heaven if Jesus wasn't there? Like, is that what it's about for you? Is it about the golden streets and the puppies?
Right.
I don't know where that came from.
And that's such a good way to phrase that question. If everything in heaven was exactly as described in the Bible, with the exception of the presence of Jesus, would you still want to go? And I think that's something we should really pause and consider. Look at the example of Moses. God told Moses right at the beginning of the Exodus, he said, look, Moses, I'm going to take an angel, different than a human being. I'm going to take an angel and I'm going to send him with you, but I'm not going to go with you because I'll kill you guys. That's the TJ translation. And Moses says, if you don't go, I don't want to go. Well, if your presence is not with me, I won't.
And I'm going to try to make an analogy or illustration that just kind of comes to mind. So if it doesn't make sense, you tell me it doesn't make sense and we're moving on right now.
That's what we have an edit button for.
Okay. But kind of like a Christian who says with their words they're a Christian but doesn't have faith to live it out. But if you think about it, so as a body apart from the Spirit is, so is faith apart from works is dead. Okay, so if a Christian is a Christian, the byproduct, he's saved by faith alone. However, the byproducts of understanding salvation is by faith alone and by grace alone. And then if that's the case, then the byproduct is us living out our lives, is our action. So it's the same way in heaven. So we're going because we're gonna get Jesus, and we're gonna experience Him, and He will satisfy every desire, desire that we have, a good desire that we have that we long for. But the byproduct is it would be extra cool if the streets were all gold. I mean, it says it.
Yeah.
So so you got some byproducts here, but the reality is the goal is Jesus, and knowing that.
Well, and the treasure is Jesus. The prize is Jesus. The crown at the end of the journey, right? I mean, Paul talks about the crown that you get after a race. Right?
Yes.
Our crown is Christ Himself.
I know that we're primarily talking to a Christian audience. Okay, I understand that. However, I can think and see some of the faces of some of my friends who are not Christians for whatever reason. They're not interested or they're just hostile toward it.
We should do a program on that.
Yeah,
how to talk to them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we are. But I can see some of their faces thinking that's the most bizarre thing. You're gonna go to heaven to get Jesus? Why Jesus? I mean, look at the money and the things that I'm getting on this side of heaven. Look at the satisfactions that are taking place. A person, Jesus. Well, I just want to encourage you to go read the book of John and understand and go back and listen to the first program that we had, the first half of this program where we talked about hell and how the severity of hell. We barely touched on it.
Oh, the reality. There's so much more to say.
And Kelley gave us some incredible links there for you to study even further. But go look at that and understand the severity of hell and the eternal punishment of hell. And then, therefore, it would illuminate how much important Jesus is in our life, and why we're talking about, yes, the final goal is to be in the presence of Jesus for eternity.
We had 13-minute discussion on hell. It wasn't, we weren't trying to scare anybody. We weren't trying to manipulate anybody. And there's a very important reason why. Heaven is not a place for people who are scared of hell. Okay, we have to set that right because I think that there's a lot of people who have been attempted to be scared into heaven, and that's not at all how this works. I just think of the y'all seen that commercial, right? It was like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
I have not seen that.
Okay,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Geico commercial.
Thank you, Kelley.
It's awesome. Anyway, but that's really not how this works. Heaven is a place for those who are in love with their king. And you were talking earlier,
And
Wesley,
who have a reverent fear.
yeah,
of
yeah,
hell,
there,
because
and
they
there's
have to
right to
have
have,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
right to have a fear of hell. But our love for Christ should be so much larger than our fear of hell. Perfect love casts out fear, right?
Right,
Little
and that reminds me of
context there,
something. A church I was visiting in Olive Branch, if anyone lives out there, but they have their pastor in the middle of a long sermon. And I admit, in this sermon, I was zoning out. There were a few moments where I was
Wait a
like,
minute.
"Oh, I'm getting tired," So he's mostly done with the sermon, and he had spent the whole sermon focusing on the beauty of Christ. And as he gets toward the end, he kind of asks sort of that "what do you want out of heaven" question. And he reminds us, if you're bored with me talking about God for 45 minutes, then heaven would be hell to you, is how he phrased it. And that struck me so much because of all those misconceptions and just because of people being scared into heaven. It's not about the fact that it's not hell and that we're not in this place of burning flames. It's the fact that God is there and the fact that we're with him.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. If you want to know more about heaven, about this Jesus that we're talking about this Jesus who, the best way, and all I can say is this: I have had a relationship with Jesus for a number of years, but only recently have I really begun understanding that he is my sovereign king. And that understanding that Jesus is king and that I am his servant absolutely changes everything. And when we look at heaven as his eternal kingdom, where he sits majestic, enthroned in victory over sin, over death, over everything, guys, that gets me excited.
It does, and I can't help but think about the place in Revelation chapter 21, where it gives us the picture of the New Jerusalem, and it talks about, every tear, there won't be any tears, there
No
won't
more
be any
tears.
pain, no suffering, and such. And so that is very important for us to remember, that the byproduct of falling in love with Jesus is that he's going to remove those.
And the thing is,
sufferings.
that's exactly why we exist as EngageMagazine.net. We want to teach you, we want to show you, we want to express to you who this Jesus is, who this God is that has captured our hearts to such an extent that we cannot help but talk about him. We cannot help but write about him. We cannot help but have a radio program about him and a YouTube channel about him. And we want to do that every day, EngageMagazine.net, where we want to share truth and apply scripture. We'll see you next week.